and welcome to Vantage Point. Over the past 2 weeks, there's been a lot unfolding in Sri Lanka, mainly in politics, and it has grabbed the attention of people from all corners of the island. It has become a topic of discussion in the streets, in restaurants, and even at your own home. To talk more about the political developments, and these are significant political developments, and this month is a crucial month in terms of the voting rights of Sri Lankans, how the voting rights should be protected, and also, most importantly, the two players who are going into this election battle. To talk to us more about the developments that have taken place from the unveiling of a common candidate for the opposition to the crossovers that have been taking place literally every week or so, I have with me here in conversation Dr. Dayan Jayathilaka, an eminent diplomat and political scientist. A very good evening, Doctor.
Good evening, Maina. It's not just at home. My wife wanted to get away from all the politics, so we went on holiday to Cape Valigam over the weekend, and it was politics. All the friends we met there, they were talking politics, so it's everywhere.
That's right, everywhere. Doctor. It's like a fever that has really gripped the people. Has it gripped you, Doctor?
It has, but much more as an analyst commentator, because I'm not a player unless you count an analyst as a player. So yes, I'm very keenly interested in what's happening. I think we're at a significant crossroads. This is not just any election. This election is different.
How is this election, do you see, different from the elections that we've seen previously? I mean, I know there are significant changes in terms of how parties are functioning for this election. We see the SLFP and the UMP, or a dissident SLFP and a UMP coming together as one force to defeat the president at this election. This is something we've never seen before.
Well, yes, that's one way in which it's different, but there are at least three other ways that I can think of. One is we've never had to vote on a third term, because there's never been a third presidential term. In fact, there's never been a third consecutive term for any leader, even a prime minister, in Sri Lanka before. Maggie Thatcher, of course, was in a fourth term when she sort of tripped out. So that's one thing. The other thing is that for the first time in a long time, and I would say since the 1994 election 20 years ago, we have a serious competitor. In 1994, you had two serious competitors, Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga and Gamini Dissanayake, but Gamini was blown up by the Tigers. So in that sense, that was also not quite an election, because poor Madam Srimati Dissanayake, who was not even a member of the UNP, had to come forward. So that wasn't really a choice. But until the last moment, it was a race. Then in 1999 and 2005, you had Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe. Now that was not quite a choice. In 2010, it was sharper, because it was General Fonseca, but then again, General Fonseca was not a politician. The campaign was a fight, but the final choice was between a person who was not a political leader, though he was a war hero, and somebody who had successfully politically guided the war. So it wasn't a contest, and it would not have been a contest even this time, because it looked like it was going to be Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, and there was the ho-hum factor everywhere. Oh no, not again. So we may as well either vote for Mahinda or stay at home. But suddenly, you had this black swan event of Maithripala Sirisena coming into the race. Now it's a race. Now we have a choice, and it's a good one.
And there was a lot of hush-hush about who this common candidate was going to be, and which the government sort of took it to their advantage and said, look here, there is no common candidate. They can't figure out who the common candidate was. But here is Maithripala Sirisena. And I don't know whether you remember, Doctor, but not last show, the show that we did together,
was going to say that,
we discussed about that. But I mean, we didn't discuss it as Maithripala Sirisena for president, but we discussed his skills and his ability and how best suited he was to be prime minister.
we've talked about Maithripala several times on this and on our Singular Counterpart show.
Exactly. So Maithripala Sirisena, coming from a Gami Gobi background, which translates to being a farming and a village background.
Yeah.
I mean, his father was into paddy cultivation, his brother is into rice mills and all of that. Very strong family in terms of farming in Polonnaruwa, that's his hometown. Here he comes in.
Yeah, you can't get more grassroots or paddy roots than that. You know?
Exactly. So he
right
comes
down
in
there,
from the government.
Yeah.
Now this came as a shock to people who really didn't see this coming.
Yeah, this was a surprise. I would say a very welcome surprise. And now people have a real choice because both candidates, I mean President Rajapaksa and Maithripala Sirisena, are good men. I think they both have strong points. They both have weaknesses, so it's a real choice. But there's one other reason in which this election is new. It's somewhere we have never been. And that is what troubles me a little bit. In this election, we are forced to make a choice, not between these two personalities as to which one should lead the country, which is the choice we wanted. But now we are being forced to make another choice. We are being forced to make a choice about the structure of the state. Now that's a big one. That's about the executive presidency and its abolition in 100 days and the reversion to a parliamentary system of government. So Mahina, that troubles me a bit because these are two big choices to make at the same time, at the same election. Do we opt to send President Rajapaksa, who has an impressive track record, who saved us from the tigers, do we opt to send him home? That's a tough one, but it's something that can be done if we think it's in the country's interest. Now, that's tough enough. But to decide at the same time whether we want a drastic remodeling of the framework of the state, the rules of the game, now that is something else altogether. It's like changing the game in a radical way. Do you want to stop playing cricket and do you want to start playing football? That's the choice that's being placed before us.
Do you see this important point in Maithripala Sirisena's manifesto, which is the abolition of the executive presidency in 100 days after winning the election, as something of a tall, like a far-fetched idea? Because we have the JVP, right, and you have been very you've spoken about the benefits of having the JVP in the opposition and how well they're doing in the opposition, but they've spoken about abstaining from supporting either candidate, and their main thing is that all presidents who run for elections talk about abolishing the executive presidency, but nobody has really done it after assuming office. Now here we have Maithripala Sirisena, who's giving us a time frame, 100 days. Do you see it from the JVP point of view that this might be something that he might not really implement after winning the elections?
Well, frankly, I'm a bit disappointed with the JVP. I mean, you can't opt out of something like this. I'm not saying they should sign up with this one or the other one, but you can't just say, send Mahinda Rajapaksa home and we're not supporting and we're not intervening in this. That's why they're going to be in a little trouble, because the breakaway group, the Frontline Socialist Party, has decided to field a candidate, Duminda Navagamu, and he'll take some of the JVP votes away. Never mind that. Mahina, you said Maithripala Sirisena's manifesto. This is not, firstly, it's not a manifesto, but this is not Maithripala Sirisena's platform. It's not his program. It existed months before. It's best known as Venerable Sobita's program, but it's really not. This is something that the former President Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga had been canvassing for many years during her tenure, during the last bit of her tenure, not at the beginning when she could have done it, but when she saw that she would have to step down after 2 years, then she thought of some way of staying in power, and she came up with this idea of a constitutional revolution. And even now she says look, this is what I was trying to do, and this is how it can be done. So it's not Maithripala's program. I would have preferred the conventional thing in any country of the presidential candidate himself coming up with his own vision for the country, from his own formation, his own experience, his own background. Instead, he has walked into and has signed off on a program that was in the public domain for quite a while, constructed by others. Now that never leads to a good result, even if you win the election. The last time I've heard of something like this, and it's not evident in other countries, it's a very Sri Lankan thing, was when Mr. S.W.R.D. Bananayake picked up the program of the Sinhala Buddhist organizations, which had been around from 1955 during the Buddha Jayanti, for the adoption of Sinhala only as the state language of Sri Lanka. Now, that wasn't his idea. That was in fact not his platform when he left the UNP in 51 and contested for the first time in 52. There, Mr. Bananayake's view was Sinhala and Tamil. But in 56, he adopted a proposal that had been made by the Buddhist clergy. Now, we think of Reverend Sobita here. At that time, it was the Eksat Bhikshu Peramuna, which took these ideas from the Buddha Jayanti, the All Ceylon Buddhist Congress report, the Buddhist Commission report, and presented it to the various political parties. Mr. Bananayake picked up on it. So in that sense, that's the only other instance in which what Maithripala is doing now has been done. Coming in and taking somebody, adopting, swearing to uphold someone else's platform. Now, Mr. Bananayake won that election, but I think we've been suffering the consequences since. I'm not happy with the way that it was done, and frankly, the 3 points that were signed yesterday, I think it takes Maithripala prisoner. Because what we do at a presidential election, Mahina, according to the Constitution, and in fact in any country where there's an elected presidency, is to pick from the country as a whole. I mean, all of us join to elect the person we think should make the decisions, should guide the destinies of the country. That's the whole island in this case. In the in other countries, the whole country, non-islands and so on. You need 50.1%. So it's a majority of the country taken as a whole that elects the man or woman who is given the power to navigate, to make the decisions. That is the executive presidency. It's either that, you have two choices. The opposition committed to the second one. That is, it's not the person who is elected by the majority of the country taken as one unit, but it would be a prime minister who has that power, because they promised to go back to the parliamentary system of government. Now, executive powers are wielded by the prime minister and his or her cabinet under that system, though Mr. Mangala Samaraweera says there's no such thing as an executive president. How does he think Tony Blair declared war on Iraq?
Executive Prime Minister.
Executive Prime Minister. How does he think Mrs. Bananayake gave the orders for tens of thousands of suspected JVPers to be killed in 1971? That's executive power in action. What is executive power, Mahina? Executive power is really the power over defense.
So do you think that the meaning of executive power, of executive presidency, all of this has got lost in translation to a certain extent?
Look, these people aren't fools. So if they aren't fools, they're trying to fool us. Let's get these things clear. What do you mean by executive power? Executive power is the power to make decisions, not the power to legislate. Laws are made by the parliament, even in Sri Lanka today. The judiciary decides on whether those laws are in keeping with the constitutional and legal norms. What the executive does, or executive power means, you make the decisions. You decide on war or peace, for instance. You decide on sovereignty issues. In other words, you are the Minister of Defense. You hold the portfolio of defense. So do we want that power to make decisions, to make the apparatus, to give orders to the state machine, especially the armed forces? Do we want that power in the hands of a person that the majority of us have elected as a country, 50.1, executive president? Or do we want to go back to the system where that power, including the portfolio of defense, is in the hands of somebody who has not been elected by the country as a whole, but by some area, for instance, Colombo, and happens to be the leader of a political party because the Tigers kill everybody else in that, all the leaders of that political party, and you have a dictatorial constitution and you're the leader of the political party, but you're elected from Colombo. And then you have the right to make decisions on whether or not the military should be withdrawn from the north, because the portfolio of defense is now with the Prime Minister. So what the opposition has to answer, and what Mr. Sirisena has to answer, is why he shouldn't be the one to hold the portfolio of defense. I'm not criticizing him. I'm saying I like him to have that portfolio of defense. We must elect somebody who will guide the destinies of the nation at the presidential election. Not somebody who's going to come in, and because some other people want him to give up power and he thinks he needs their support, has signed off his power within 100 days. Mr. Sirisena has to tell us who is going to be holding the portfolio of defense. I don't care about the other portfolios. He can give away anything else he wants. But as Vasanta Seranayake, who was one of the most important crossovers, D.S. Seranayake's great-grandson, said in his proposals, the president must hold the portfolio of defense and nothing else. So let Mr. Sirisena give up everything else, hand it over to the Prime Minister, but defense has to stay with the person that we elect to guide the destinies of the nation. Otherwise, we are electing somebody who is no longer going to guide the destinies of the nation. Who is going to be our leader?
But when you mean guiding the destinies of the nation, Doctor, there is so much...
Who's the captain of the ship?
There is so much more than defense, isn't it?
But that's the core, Mahina. That's the core. Who captains the ship? Who gives the orders? Who makes the decisions? Is it the president whom we have elected, all of us, because he or she needs 50.1 to get to that post? Or is it going to be the Prime Minister whom all of us have not elected, but who has just come from one area? I mean, it could be, I don't know, Attanagala, like Mrs. Bananayake. You know, Mahina, this is important because during the time of Mrs. Bananayake, I'm sure you weren't born, even your mum must have been a teenager, people were rummaging in the dustbins and eating papaw skins. There was semi-starvation in this country under Mrs. Bananayake's administration of 1777. Now, how was that possible? She wasn't a cruel woman. That's because she represented Attanagala. She headed the Sri Lanka Freedom Party because her husband was shot by a monk. And she didn't know, really, she didn't feel the pressure from the country as a whole. That never happened under Jaya Jawardhan, not because, you know, he was a superior human being, but when you're elected by the country as a whole, you feel a sense of responsibility. You feel the pressure. You know you have to win these votes again. You can't afford to have people starving. That's also why President Rajapaksa, I think, took the war to its conclusion. He felt the public pressure from the whole country. Now, do we want that power to make the decisions to be in a person who has the broadest base, who has been elected by 50.1% of the people? That's the executive presidency. Who holds the defense portfolio? Or do we want it vested in somebody who has a much narrower base and therefore can't see the reality, doesn't feel the pressure from society? Now, I think that poor Mr. Sirisena, who would have made a very good president, he would have made a very good president because we need a change. I like, as you know, President Rajapaksa, I support him, but he comes with family baggage.
Yeah, let's go into that a bit later, Doctor. Let's just talk about the very important point here, which many people feel that they really can't relate to, or they really can't comprehend, which is abolishing the executive presidency and then appointing Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe as Prime Minister. Now, Mr. Mangala Samaraveera sort of tried to clarify this through a media briefing, because when it initially was announced by Mr. Maithripala Sirisena at the unveiling of the common candidate, everyone was a little bit in a spot of bother, in confusion.
Yeah.
Right? So Mr. Mangala Samaraveera said that opposition leader Ranil Wickremesinghe would be appointed as the Prime Minister, but not with executive powers. And he said a national government would be formed until constitutional changes are made within 100 days, while a general election would be held after the term of the present Parliament ends in April 2016. Now, it was also mentioned that the Prime Minister is the head of the cabinet and he is first among equal. Now again, people are wondering, how is this going to work? We are talking about abolishing executive presidency, and we're also talking about appointing a Prime Minister and appointing Ranil Wickremesinghe as Prime Minister. How would you sort of deal with this confusion that people have? How would you help people get over this if somebody asks you this question?
Well, Mr. Mangala Samaraveera has a degree in dress design. I hope his designs are better than his political designs, because this statement makes no sense. He says a Prime Minister without executive powers. Then we have to be told what happens to the executive powers of the presidency. Now, this isn't a magic show. Mr. Sirisena isn't a conjurer. He doesn't come and here are the executive powers that he's elected with, and then in 100 days he takes away the curtain or the veil or whatever, the cloak, and woof, no more executive powers in Sri Lanka. What are executive powers? The executive powers are the authority to make decisions, especially to tell the armed forces, okay, this is what you do. You pull out of the north, you fight, you don't fight. That is what executive authority is about. Now, you don't have a system without executive powers. Mr. Maithripala Sirisena can't just make them evaporate. Somebody has to give the orders constitutionally. Now, there's either a president, or, as in the system we had before, and you have in Britain, the Prime Minister and his or her cabinet. Now, how did Maggie Thatcher decide to send ships to the Falklands? That's executive power. So, if Mr. Sirisena is going to divest the presidency of executive powers, what happens to those powers? They can't evaporate. They have to go somewhere. In the world, there are two systems. Either they are with the president, elected president. Sometimes we have an electoral college, like in the United States, is an intermediate kind of structure. Or they are vested in the Prime Minister and his or her cabinet, or Prime Minister and the cabinet. Now, which is it? To put it in simple English, who is going to be the Minister of Defense? That we need to know, really. Certainly the armed forces need to know that. So, saying that Mr. Wickremesinghe is going to be the Prime Minister without executive powers begs the question, then who has executive powers? Who has authority over the armed forces? Secondly, Mr. Samaraveera says Mr. Wickremesinghe will be the first among equals. Who is Mr. Samaraveera to decide that? Why should Mr. Wickremesinghe and not Mr. Sirisena, who we have been asked to vote for, and I'd be very happy to vote for, if he were to have that authority, why shouldn't he be the first among equals? Okay? Why shouldn't Maithripala Sirisena, the man we are going to vote for, if we decide to, why shouldn't he be the first among equals? The other question, what is going to happen to Mr. Maithripala Sirisena after 100 days? Now, the MOU says that he will be, the president will be a symbol of national unity. Now, every president is potentially a symbol of national unity because he or she has to get 50.1%. And that means you have to get the widest possible support. And the Prime Minister doesn't have to be a symbol of national unity because, he or she comes from a small area, but in any case, that's the office of the elected president as a symbol of national unity. Now, some presidents don't do that. D.B. Vijayatunga, for instance, was talking about the minorities being creepers and the majority being a tree. Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa seems to be a believer in D.B. Chintane rather than Mahinda Chintane. He has it seems to have the same idea of this nation. Now, that's not being a symbol of national unity. But the office of the elected president has the best potential of being a symbol of national unity. Then it goes on to say that, now I'm talking about the MOU that was signed, that the president will have the powers appropriate to that status. What are these powers? I repeat, who holds the portfolio of defense? We have to know who the Minister of Defense is going to be. It's not a joke. It's a hub of the state. It's a power over the armed forces. It's a power over the decision to make war or peace, to surrender or not. Who is that going to be? Now, why shouldn't Mr. Sirisena be the first among equals? If he is not the first among equals, and Mr. Wickramasinghe is the first among equals according to Mr. Samaravira, then where is Mr. Sirisena? Hello? Is he going to be like the Governor General was in the old days? The Governor General, the Governor General was in fact more powerful because the Governor General had the power to declare emergency, martial law. Sir Oliver Gunithalaka, during emergency 58, he had that power. On the advice of the Prime Minister, he had that power and he deployed the armed forces in 1958 to quell the race riots. But Mr. Sirisena, whom we are supposed to elect, and I have plenty of reason to think that one should elect him under normal circumstances, because he would be a Mahinda Rajapaksa light, that is a kinder, gentler Mahinda. We are now confused because he is not the one who will have the power to deploy the armed forces. If he does, we need to see that in writing.
Well, on that, we take a short commercial break. We'll be back with more on the common candidate, the crossovers, and also government reaction. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Vantage Point. Doctor, we are discussing the developments that have taken place since the unveiling of the common candidate. Let's go a couple of days back. Let's go a few weeks back and talk about that event, because that's where everything really boiled up. The unveiling of the common candidate, we saw the SLFP media briefing. There were so many media briefings that were taking place simultaneously. The UMP2 was having a media briefing. Now, the SLFP media briefing, where Maithripala Sirisena revealed that he would be the common candidate, was flanked by, we saw Ms. Chandrika Bandaranayake Kumaratunga right next to Maithripala Sirisena. On the other hand, we saw Mr. Rajitha Senaratne, who had crossed over from the government. We saw Duminda Disanayake also in the head table. And what were you thinking when you watched that media briefing where Chandrika Kumaratunga said that it was like coming back to her Mahagedara, coming back to her main ancestral home, and where Rajitha Senaratne said that there was a lot of corruption in the government, that he could not take any more of this corruption. And even where Maithripala said, that there is a lot of corruption taking place in the government, but many of the ministers have been held under a fist and silent about it because of the fear. What did you make out of this press briefing?
I thought Mr. Sirisena got off to a very good start. I liked what he said. It resonated with me. He was polite towards the president, but he didn't pull his punches about the status quo and what was happening. I believe everything that Mr. Sirisena said about the present administration. And I think one could empathize with him. He projected the image of dignity. He came across as a courageous gentleman who epitomized some of the best qualities of the Sinhala Buddhist rural people. Now, that part of it was fine. But if you take it as a media conference, I mean, I was born into a media family, it was a bit of a disaster. Because you could hear on the live mic President Kumaratunga prompting Maitripala and cueing him and saying, Ati, and so on and so on. You could hear it. And then she told the media, Ati, you know. I mean, come on, she's a guest. The impression I got was that she was trying to manage Maitripala Sirisena, who is the man who we are supposed to vote for as president. Now, one thing I'll say about Mahinda Rajapaksa, and even before he was president, when he was prime minister, when he was leader of the opposition, even as a minister, he couldn't be managed by Chandrika. I mean, he was a sassy, self-confident young politician. Nobody could tell him, you know, shh, don't say this, why don't you say this, and so on. This was while the mics were on. You can replay that. And the other thing was President Kumaratunga's own performance, where she said that one of the children said, Ammi, Mahinda will kill you. Now somebody tried to kill Ammi. And that wasn't Mahinda, that was Velupilla Prabhakaran. That's why she can't see properly with one eye. It wasn't Mahinda who tried to kill Ammi. And who got rid of Velupilla Prabhakaran? Mahinda. Right? Of course, it could be said it was General Fonseca, but then why didn't Chandrika get General Fonseca to do the same job when she was Commander-in-Chief? For 2 terms, 12 years, General Fonseca was in her army. So, if General Fonseca was there in her army, then we have to look to the change element. It's Mahinda who rid us of Prabhakaran and the Tigers, who gave General Fonseca the opportunity of doing that, together with the other service chiefs, and basically brought to justice the guy who really tried to kill Ammi. So, you know, I'm listening to this and saying Mahinda is going to kill Ammi. And the former president said, dissent is not allowed. A white van will come and pick you up and kill you and dump you on the roadside. Now, she was saying this while dissenting at a press conference. Everybody was dissenting. Nobody was going to come and pick anyone up in a white van and kill them. I mean, there's much to be said against this government. But this is, you know, she was tripping out. And she talked for too long. And she cried. All right. Then comes Dr. Rajitha Senarath, or maybe he came before Chandrika. And he talked for longer than Maitripala Sirisena, and he told us all about his political career. Now, who's interested? He's not the candidate. And what was he going on about? So, it showed me not only a media disaster, because they should have been showcasing Maitripala Sirisena and letting him speak. The other two should have just contented themselves with very short, supportive statements. They didn't. Now, you know what that told me? And I was watching the same thing when the MOU was signed. I thought, hey, now, if Maitripala is voted in as president, and then in 100 days, he no longer has presidential powers, what does he have? Maybe he doesn't even preside at cabinet meetings, or the president presides at cabinet meetings. If he's not even the first among equals, we don't know what happens to him. And then, who's going to govern us? These guys. I mean, the people we saw at the media conference and the ones we saw at the signing of the MOU are going to be the cabinet. They are the ones who are going to rule us after the election. That's why they're talking so much. They don't even let Maitripala talk. You know, so then it figured, the penny dropped. So this election then is a choice, let me get this right, it's not between Mahinda Rajapaksa, who has a strong track record but also has a downside, and Maitripala Sirisena, who can give us a fresh start, turn a new page. But it's a choice between Maitripala Sirisena, who's just a drop down, you know, you mouse click on Maitripala Sirisena, there's a drop down box. And these are the people who will be running the show. So it's a choice between Mahinda and Chandrika and Rajitha and Mangala and Ranil. That's what we want. We want to move forward. We don't want to go back.
But isn't having Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga a way of garnering a lot of SLFP votes, having Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe garnering all the UMP votes, Mr. Mangala Samaraveera? Now, for instance, Mr. Mangala Samaraveera was very instrumental with the victory of Mr. Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga. He also played a pivotal role in the victory of...
No, Prabhakaran was instrumental because he knocked off Gamal Dissanayake. Whether Mangala was there or not, Chandrika would have won that election.
Mangala was also very important in Mahinda Rajapaksa's campaign. So, I mean, we've seen that he has a lot of skill set geared for, making people present. So maybe all these people who flank Maithripala Sirisena are to give that sort of confidence to voters.
Yeah, but they should dial down the presidential candidate talks. These guys are just the chorus. But they don't let him talk. They only let him sign stuff. He just gets a chance to speak a few minutes. And it's scripted. I mean, I actually saw him referring to some notes. I've never seen him in all these years in politics actually looking at any paper before. And then I know there's something wrong because he's not speaking from the heart to his people. Somebody has given him some bullet points. Now that press conference, as I said, why are these people talking so much? Mahina, what this is like. This reminds me, I think the people of this country quite a few people want to change. They may not want to see Mahinda out, but they want to change in the way things are done. Many of them might want to give Maithripala a chance because he comes across as a decent and brave man who comes from the people. Now, that's what most of society wants. But there are these two people who are flanking Maithripala at the signing of the MOU. Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga and Ranil Wickremesinghe. Maithripala is stuck between these two. Now, to me, it seems that theirs is something very different from what society wants from Maithripala. Society may want Maithripala, at the least they want him to give Mahinda a run for his money, and at best they want him to
What should he really signify to people? What should Maithripala Sirisena, given 1 month before the election, what should he signify to the people? What sort of character should he portray?
He should speak from his heart. He knows what's wrong in here. He should say not only what's wrong, but how this can be a better place. Not the executive presidency. How the country can be run better, how it can be a fairer place, how we can breathe more easily, how we won't have a family bearing down on us. I mean, the good things about the Rajapaksa regime, about President Rajapaksa's rule, he should preserve. It's a strong and secure Sri Lanka now. But there are ways in which it can be improved. You know what this sounds like to me, mind about the way it's going now? Now, Mr. Sirisena is, as reminded us, from a rural peasant background. It's one thing if he says, look, these paddy fields are being run by a person who's using them for the wrong purpose. He's not being as productive as he should be. He's in fact planting ganja some of the time. So I want to chase him out, and I want to cultivate this in a way that it will be most beneficial to the people. But that's not what he's saying. What he is saying is, this guy is ruining this property, and you know what? I'm going to chase him out. I'm going to become a scarecrow in this property, and I'm going to break the dam, which is the executive presidency. Now, breaking the dam is not going to help. It's just going to flood the place. Or it's like saying, okay, you see a building, and you say, look at that tenant. He's a good man, but that family is ruining that building. Look at the way they're behaving. We need to throw them out of that building. He is not saying that. He is saying, I'm going to level the building.
So in essence, you're saying that Maithripala Sirisena at this moment of time should not talk about the executive presidency, but talk about matters that touch the people more, that are more humane matters.
He should be like a presidential candidate anywhere in the world, including in Sri Lanka. He should be his own man. He should not be going according to the script. And he should not. We vote for a leader. We vote for a leader. We can't be cheated. What's happening now is that Mr. Sirisena is being treated as a Trojan horse. You know the story of the Trojan horse?
Yes, I do, and it's a good point that you brought in about how careful the people should be when they make a decision at this election, because on the Saturn program, Mr. Harin Fernando from UMP said,
Good job.
People won't have an opportunity to vote for another 8 years. So
why? There's a parliamentary election coming up.
Therefore, as for a presidential election.
President, yeah.
So therefore, this election would be a key election for people to really understand the gravity of whatever these two candidates are saying.
Not necessarily, because if you have a majority in parliament, a proper parliamentary election, you have the parliamentary election, you chase this government out, and if you think that the president has been conducting himself very badly, you have an impeachment motion. You can get the president out, or you cut off his money, the money bills, or you defeat him on the budget. No, there's another chance. This is not the only chance.
If that was the case, and if people are, as you say, a little frustrated by what's been going on about the family dynasty, why was this not done before? The impeachment, the defeat of the budget. Isn't it because the present government has the majority in parliament?
No, it's because people didn't want to vote for Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe. I mean, they weren't given a choice. Now you have a choice with Maitripala. Let him do what Mahinda did, what Chandrika did. Give him a chance to be the president and to be the Minister of Defence, at least, to last out the whole term, to change this country in accordance with what he knows. He's a man of the people. He can govern for the people. It can be a government of the people, for the people, by the people. But instead, Chandrika and Ranil are trying to use Maitripala Sirisena like a Trojan horse. You remember the story. The Greeks couldn't capture Troy. So Ulysses figured out, okay, we'll build this big, beautiful horse, we'll withdraw our ships, and the Trojans will think they'll be fooled. And that's exactly what happened. One person in Troy said, don't open the gates and bring this horse in. They in fact had to break the wall, the ramparts of the city, to bring the horse in. They thought that the Greeks had left, and then they were in the tummy of the horse. They got down and they killed everybody in Troy. I mean, well, not everybody, they took over the city. Now, Chandrika and Ranil cannot win a presidential election because the people are not going to vote for them. So they know that Maitripala might. So they want him to be the guy who gets them into the system, and then they're going to level the system because they know that nobody is going to ever elect them the leader of this country. Again, they did it once with Chandrika, never again, and with Ranil, never ever. So they want to eliminate the executive presidency, but to do that you have to win the election. So they want Maitripala to be that. So they're trying to use Maitripala the Maitripala candidacy as a Trojan horse. They drop down from the tummy, and then they will run this country again the way they did before. So our real choice is, do we really think, I was watching the photograph of the MOU signing, Maitripala versus Mahinda, fair choice. But is he really, he had Chandrika and Ranil flanking him. Are we really saying, or is he really saying, that Chandrika is better than Mahinda? That Ranil is better than Mahinda? Or that the two of them together are better than Mahinda? Especially when he won't be the executive president and he can't control them anymore? I'm not convinced by him.
Doctor, there's a lot to talk about, and I feel we have a limited amount of time. Let's talk about the Jatika Hela Urume. The Jatika Hela Urume were also very vocal about the abolishing of the executive presidency, but they brought it in a different light about the 90th Amendment to the Constitution that was revealed by Venerable Athuraliya Ratanathera. We saw partly Champika Ranavaka and Udaya Gammanpilla giving up their positions, and also the party talking very strongly about an anti-Mahinda campaign. However, they were absent at the signing of the MOU. What do you think about the role that the JHU is playing right now? Do you feel that they're yet undecided about what stance they want to take?
Well, I think the JHU can play a very good role. In fact, I think the JVP could have, but it has chosen to opt out or sort of hurl tomatoes from the sidelines at Mahinda Rajapaksa. The JHU had very good proposals. They weren't the only ones who had good proposals. Vasanta Senanayake, D.S. Senanayaka's great-grandson, who is a member, I think he's a leader of this young parliamentarians group, a bipartisan group, he had some very good proposals. Why do I think they're good? Their proposals represented almost a Buddhist golden middle path, or an Aristotelian golden mean, between the extremes of radical and immediate abolition and retention of the status quo, especially with the top-heavy with the 18th Amendment. And the proposals that Attureli Ratanathero and Champika made were similar to the proposals of Vasanta Senanayake. That was a slimmed-down, reformed presidency, which sheds the excess powers. Vasanta quite rightly said, defense should be the only portfolio that the presidency retains. Attureli Ratana and Champika talked about a presidency which was not abolished, but was more responsible to the parliament and to the judiciary. So a real separation of powers, real checks and balances, which would have brought the Sri Lankan presidency more in line with the American and the French presidencies. The Sri Lankan presidency is derived from the French presidency, but there's a kind of a twist. JR tweaked it and Mahindra tweaked it more. So there was this option, Mahina. I cannot understand why Maithripala Sirisena was sort of rushed into signing off on this MOU, which promised in its first sentence the abolition of the executive presidency, in 100 days, and the reversion to the parliamentary system. I mean, he could have very well modified it and had a reformed presidency. I think he still can. Yeah, he's got till December 8th, when nominations close and his manifesto comes out. He can say, look, I've talked to a broader group of people, and at least for the first term, I shall retain some of the executive powers. We have to steer this transition. You know, transitions can't be made within 100 days. That's what happened to Mikhail Gorbachev. He moved too fast and you woke up one morning and there was no more Soviet Union because Boris Yeltsin had taken over. Now, Maithripala Sirisena is the Mikhail Gorbachev, well-intentioned, decent man, but he won't be able to control this process of reform. And the Boris Yeltsins who will take over will be Ranil and Chandrika, and you won't have a state. Why did JR bring this executive presidency in mind? People forget that. What was his argument? He said, in 1966, at the Sri Lanka Association for the Advancement of Sciences annual sessions, he said, we need a strong and stable executive, free from the whims and fancies of the legislature. Now, imagine this parliament. Imagine this parliament where you've seen crossovers, people come and go, where money talks. Imagine if there weren't an executive presidency above all of that. We would not have stability that is needed for economic development. I don't mean the stability of having one family ruling us forever. I mean the stability that JR talked about. What if you have a situation in which two parties are pretty much equally poised and the decisive vote is in the hands of the TNA? Under Mr. Sambandhan, it's a decent party. But Mr. Suresh Premachandran said a few weeks ago that the military should be withdrawn from the north, and that should be a condition for supporting either of the candidates. Now, what if Mr. Sambandhan is no more? He's in his 80s. You don't have an executive presidency. Defense is not in the hands of the executive president. Mr. Wickramasinghe of CFA fame is the Prime Minister, the first among equals, as Mangala says. And the TNA says, okay, we will help you retain power, but you have to commit to withdraw the military from the north in 100 days. Well, how do we know it won't happen?
Well, Doctor, we'll have to take another commercial break. We'll be back with more on Vantage Point. Welcome back to Vantage Point. Well, Doctor, we've been so engrossed in conversation that we've lost track of time, but there are so many things that we could talk about and we need to talk about, and that is the government reaction to the unveiling of the common candidate. Now, there were several ministers who made some astonishing remarks once the common candidate was announced, we had a government minister, senior government minister, stating that, you know, we have already earned our fill in by being in the ruling party for so long, and now if you vote for the Maithripala faction, they'll have to come back and make a killing all over again from the beginning. Then you had President Mahinda Rajapaksa saying that he has files on everyone. It was actually resonating some of these comical incidents that we saw on a stage play recently. And also we saw the Satana program that was to be aired on the Sirsa TV 2 weeks ago on a Saturday. Transmission being blocked.
I was phoning in
on two private on a private cable network and also on a state.
Strange coincidence. Network. Must have been a UFO.
I don't know whether these. I'm sure the first and two are related, but I don't know whether the third is related. Your thoughts on the government reaction to?
Okay, here's some soundbite. You know, some free advice for President Rajapaksa if he wants to win this one. Get the ugly guys off his campaign. I mean, don't have people, ministers and MPs who look like gangster rappers criticizing Maithripala Sirisena, who's a nice, decent guy. Stick to President himself. He's a good communicator. He's good. Have Vidura Vikramanayaka, Dala Salah Peruma, Dayasiri Jayasekara, Vimala Veeravansa if you need a little spice, Hirunika Premachandra if she's willing, and that's it. Do not do what has been happening in the last few days of having these sort of thug types, you know, bald-headed guys who look like they're about to beat up a high commissioner, coming in verbally beating up Maithripala Sirisena. You feel like going and voting for Maithripala, so don't do that. And my advice to Maithripala Sirisena, if you win it, you own it. If we elect you executive president, that's who you are. You can shed the powers, but you keep defense for a whole term. We'd like to hear that as a promise. And promise that you won't take the army out of the north. Those two things are what I would advise.
But these statements that are being made by ministers are not statements that can be taken lightly. I mean, for instance, saying that we've already made a fill, we've earned our amount, we've already made a killing.
At least that's one.
While in the ruling party.
That's the strangest argument for
I mean, these are things them. I mean, people would generally talk about, but you would never see a minister coming out and confessing to it.
My simple answer, even if one decides that the risk is too great and you prefer to go with President Rajapaksa this time, be determined at the same moment that you will never vote for this government again, that at the parliamentary election or referendum, you are going to vote against these guys. So then Mahinda, if he's re-elected, will have to deal with a parliament in which you don't have these thugs, clowns and crooks. And we will have them off our back, and we need them off our back.
And another thing about the Satana political program airing, the time, it was the station was completely blocked on two cable network providers in Sri Lanka. The head of one cable network said that he was apologetic about it, but said that there were technical glitches. Doesn't this portray lack of democracy?
It portrays that there's something rotten, not only in the state of Denmark in Shakespeare's play, but certainly in the state of Sri Lanka. Except I'm not convinced that what's rotten is the executive presidency or even Mahinda Rajapaksa. I think everything other than the head of the fish is rotten. And they pull the plug on your show, let's pull the plug on the government at the parliamentary election. This one, we have to think a little more over the next few weeks. And on this show as well.
And also, Doctor, let's quickly go on to crossovers, because I would like to talk more about the government reaction, because it seemed, and on most of the columns and even in the column that you wrote, it seems as if they were not prepared for a common candidate from within the government, and therefore they found themselves at a loss of words. But let's just go into the
They're too arrogant and complacent. How could they see it?
And let's just go into the crossovers now. There have been several crossovers over the past few weeks. When Maithripala Sirisena became the common candidate, he said, this is just the head. There are the legs, the body, the hands, everything that is to come. And Mr. Rajatha Senaratne said, we're giving it to you in small doses so that you'll have something to talk about every day of the week. Now, the recent crossover was that of Mr. Navin Disanayake. Do you think that was a smart move on?
It was good that
Navin's part?
was good that he crossed over. That was fine, but I think this crossover thing shouldn't be overestimated because crossovers count at a parliamentary election or in parliament. That's how Chandrika lost control over the parliament in 2000-2001. But this is a presidential election. Navin crossing over, yes, it counts, and he's a very good speaker. He brings something to the table, but finally, crossovers don't count that much in a presidential election because you bring with you only a bit of your voters. The rest, they would vote as a country.
But also that have something to do with the image or the confidence that people have in the government?
Yeah, but I don't think they have a heck of a lot of confidence more in the parliamentarians. I mean, frankly, if it's a choice of Mahinda Rajapaksa and the parliamentarians, I think people trust Mahinda and like him more than they like any parliamentarian. So, I'm not too impressed. I mean, with the whole crossover thing, I think the opposition is wasting time instead of running a proper presidential election campaign. They are working on an impeachment strategy. This is not an impeachment. The numbers in parliament don't matter. What matters are the number of voters who vote for your presidential candidate.
So at the end of the day, it's this two actors who really have to get their act together.
Yep.
As there's just 1 month more for the big day in January, and the people are really talking, and the people have their eyes open.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the conclusion of today's edition of Vantage Point. There was much to talk about. Unfortunately, we only have this limited amount of time. But do join us again in a fortnight where we are sure there will be more developments and much more to talk about. Thank you for joining us. Take care and good night.